Lyra Valen crouched among the twisted, slick-limbed branches of a harrowleaf tree, her molten gold eyes narrowed in silent scrutiny. Below, a solitary human, muscles taut beneath the battered fabric of his exploration gear, methodically combed the shimmering undergrowth. Mark Ellis, she reminded herself, the object of her reluctant scientific fascination. He was searching for the vanished members of his expedition, oblivious to the perils that prowled the iridescent forests of Vera. Lyra's lips curled into a private smirk. Humans and their dependency on raw, hormonal surges. How quaint. Her people, the Valen, had evolved past such primitive chaos. Every breath, every contraction of muscle, was governed by disciplined will. Panic was a relic. But still, she watched, her curiosity sharpened by the strange unpredictability of his kind. The forest shivered, leaves refracting the pearlescent sunlight. Then, with a guttural snarl, a beast emerged, a four-legged juggernaut, its hide armored in bony, glistening spurs. It moved with predatory purpose, nostrils flaring as it tracked the human's scent. Lyra settled deeper into the shadows, anticipating a lesson in Veyran natural selection. The outcome seemed certain. But as the beast lunged, Mark's body blurred into motion. He twisted away with a speed that defied her calculations, driven by pure, unfiltered instinct. Adrenaline surged through him, muscles bunching and releasing in a fluid, desperate dance. He rolled aside just as claws raked the soil, spraying glittering clumps of earth. Lyra's own enhanced senses struggled to follow the sequence. A flash of limbs, the snap of a branch, the whipcord tension of a body primed for survival. She felt her clinical detachment waver. This was no mere flailing panic. This was adaptation made manifest, a living algorithm, recalculating with every heartbeat. Lyra leaned forward, fascination flickering behind her golden gaze. Perhaps there was more to this stress response than she had credited. A low, ominous rumble rolled through the canopy, vibrating the leaves overhead. The chemical storm was coming. Lyra tasted the acrid tang on the air, moments before the first drops began to hiss against her armored suit. Below, Mark glanced skyward, rain already beating on his exposed skin. Instead of scrambling for the nearest cave, where the acidic runoff pooled, a fatal trap, he sprinted for the high ridge, boots kicking up phosphorescent moss. Lyra's approval was grudging but genuine. She dropped lightly from her perch, her own movements silent, shadowed. The rain stung her cheeks, but failed to breach the patchwork metal plates layered over her athletic frame. She wondered, with a flicker of concern, how Mark's unprotected skin would fare beneath the burning rain. As he darted between trees, Mark's focus never wavered. He dodged a falling branch with a leap that defied probability, landing in a crouch that sent another shiver of intrigue through Lyra. He was improvising, adapting, surviving, not by calculation, but by gut and grit. "Hey," Mark called, his voice echoing up through the thrumming storm. "You going to keep spying, or help me find those missing explorers before we both melt?" Startled by his audacity, Lyra dropped to the ground beside him, boots squelching in the soaked earth. "I'm impressed you noticed me," she said, her translator rendering her deep, harmonic voice smooth and even. Mark shot her a sidelong grin, rainwater streaming from his hair. "I didn't," he admitted. "But if I were alone on an alien world, I'd hope someone was watching my back. Either I'm lucky, or someone just decided to interfere." She found herself smiling, despite the acid prickle on her skin. "Your reflexes are remarkable. I underestimated human adaptability." "Sometimes panic works wonders," Mark replied, laughter threading through his words as he met her gaze. In that brief exchange, something sparked, a flutter in Lyra's chest that was neither logical nor willed. It unsettled her, but she pushed the sensation aside. Together they climbed, the ground slipping beneath their feet as the storm intensified. They reached the summit just as a flood of caustic water swept through the forest below, scouring the landscape. Mark's breathing slowed, his pulse settling as the chemical surge drained from his body. Lyra watched, silently cataloging every detail: the recovery, the resilience, the ineffable vitality. For the first time, she wondered, with something like longing, if her people's path of perfect control had cost them something irreplaceable. The answer, she suspected, would not be found in her textbooks, but here, amid the storm, beside a human whose heart beat wildly against the odds. With the storm finally behind them, Mark Ellis paused atop the wind-blasted ridge and shook acid-stung droplets from his sleeves. He unclipped a compact holomap from his belt, flicking it open with practiced ease. A shimmering projection flickered to life in the air between them: terrain lines, data overlays, pulsing red markers. "The expedition was last seen near here," he said, tracing a gloved finger along a ravine choked with fallen trunks and luminous moss. "Any clue what they were chasing?" Lyra Valen's eyes narrowed, gold irises swirling with unease. The shifting pattern of dark markings across her angular face betrayed concern. A subtle tell, but telling nonetheless. "That beast that attacked you," she murmured, "doesn't belong in this region. The local fauna, nothing here moves like that. They're migrating, changing behaviors. The team was investigating the cause. Now they're missing." Mark's gaze swept over the battered forest below. The trees, once radiant with shifting colors, were now scarred and pitted by acid, bark peeling in curling ribbons. Even the ground looked wrong, gouged by recent slides and littered with bone shards. "There's more you're not telling me." Lyra hesitated. She was trained to maintain composure, to betray nothing, especially to humans. Yet Mark's tone, steady, not accusatory, caught her off guard. She glanced away, voice dropping. "Other teams have vanished. The Accord has kept it quiet to avoid panic." She let the silence stretch. Then, curiosity pricking, she asked, "How did you know I was worried?" A smile tugged at Mark's lips, gentle, lacking his usual bravado. "We may not sense bioelectric cues like you, but we're experts at reading body language. You watch my primitive responses. I've been watching yours." Lyra felt a pulse of surprise, then a flicker of respect. She had not expected a human to notice the minute shifting of her facial patterns or the subtle tension in her posture. For all their talk of instinct, he was proving alarmingly observant. The moment fractured as a distant, guttural bellow echoed through the trees, deeper, more urgent than before. Lyra's head snapped up. Her suit's sensors pulsed with warning glyphs. "Multiple signatures," she said, voice tight. "More of the spurred beasts. But—" She scanned the readouts, brow furrowing. "Their movements are wrong. They're not solitary hunters." Mark checked the charge on his sidearm, eyes scanning the terrain for possible routes of escape. "They are now," he muttered. "Whatever the expedition found, it's changing them." Lyra's ear tips twitched, a gesture she'd never have allowed herself around her own kind. Whatever they discovered is accelerating adaptation. It's pushing evolution into overdrive. That shouldn't be possible. She shook her head, data racing behind her eyes. "Like a permanent adrenaline spike," Mark mused, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You're not just curious about me. You're hoping human biology might offer answers your people missed." His words struck her like a thrown stone, direct, unfiltered. She opened her mouth, uncertain how to answer. The truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit. Before she could form a reply, the ground shuddered beneath their feet. The ridge groaned, fissures snaking outward as the earth began to crumble. The storm's assault had undermined the slope. Lyra's system flashed escape protocols: calculate trajectory, assess risk, leap. But before she could act, Mark's hand closed firmly around hers, warm and insistent. "Try following your instincts for once," he urged, and in that breathless instant he was already moving, pulling her toward a precarious ledge that jutted beyond the collapse. They ran together, boots skidding over slick stone. The world tilted, gravity lurching as boulders tumbled away behind them. Lyra felt a surge of chemicals flood her veins, raw, exhilarating, and utterly uncontrollable. The calculations, the risk assessments, all were swept away by the rush. They leapt as one. Air howled past them, the ridge dissolving in a cascade of shattered rock. For a suspended heartbeat, Lyra was weightless, untethered from logic or training, holding tight to Mark's hand. They landed hard but safe, bodies pressed close, the debris roaring past just meters above their heads. Lyra exhaled shakily, pulse hammering against her ribs. That wasn't the logical choice, she managed, voice trembling with shock and something like laughter. But it worked. Mark steadied her, his grip lingering as the adrenaline bled away. Sometimes you have to take a leap, he replied, his tone gentle but sure. Their hands remained clasped, neither willing to break the connection. For Lyra, the sensation was electric, a tangle of signals surging along her skin, bypassing every control she possessed. She let herself feel it, just for a moment, as the world settled into silence around them. The predator's roars grew louder, echoing through the warped trunks and glassy leaves of Vera's forest. Lyra and Mark pressed forward, their bodies moving in unspoken coordination, each trial honing the sharp edge of their partnership. Lyra's internal system ran calculations with every step, tallying escape routes and likelihoods. When a crimson warning flashed behind her eyes, odds of survival 15%, she said it aloud without thinking. Mark grinned, teeth flashing in the strange half-light. I've survived worse. He stepped closer, almost brushing her shoulder. The nearness sent a flood of unfamiliar chemicals through Lyra's body, ancient primal signals, yet thrillingly new to her. Her skin tingled, senses heightening beyond conscious control. They slipped through a maze of thorned vines, Mark ducking under a low branch as Lyra swept past with feline agility. The ground trembled with distant footfalls, branches snapped behind them. For a heartbeat, Lyra's mind catalogued every threat, every variable, until Mark caught her eye, breathless but smiling, and the numbers melted away. Their first near miss was a shadow lurching out from the undergrowth, teeth gleaming. Mark fired a flare. Lyra's arms snapped up to shield his exposed side, and the creature recoiled into darkness. The second was subtler, a spray of caustic spores drifting on the breeze, which Lyra spotted just in time, shoving Mark aside before the cloud could envelop him. By the third encounter, a bone-spurred predator crashing down from above, they moved as one. Mark dove left, Lyra swept right, a silent rhythm connecting their movements even as claws slashed the air where they'd stood a moment before. After that, Lyra stopped calculating. The data streams flickered and faded. Her body, for once, did not wait for permission. She felt her own muscles tighten, blood surging, her breaths coming short and sharp. It was an echo of the adrenaline response she had always suppressed, a sensation at once alarming and intoxicating. As they crested a low rise, the ground shimmered ahead, a field of crystalline shards, each one humming faintly with inner light. Mark slowed, boots crunching glass-like fragments. Your markings shift when you're excited, he said, glancing sideways. Like living tattoos. Lyra caught herself, attempting to smooth the swirling patterns that now danced in rapid pulses across her cheeks and brow. But she hesitated, letting them flicker a moment longer. It's a vestige of our prehistory, she said, voice softer than usual. Most see it as embarrassingly primitive. Mark crouched beside a waist-high cluster of violet shards, his tone light but his gaze steady. I think it's stunning. Lyra felt her face flush, the markings deepening despite her efforts. Before she could reply, a piercing shriek knifed through the clearing, vibrating every shard and rattling her teeth. Instinct and calculation merged. They dove for cover behind a jutting crystal outcrop, hearts pounding in sync. The creature that emerged was not one of the spurred beasts. It skittered on six jointed legs, its hide faceted with reflective plates. Where its mouth should have been, a resonant cavity pulsed in time with the crystals, sending shudders through the ground. Its eyes, too many and too bright, fixed on their hiding spot. This was something new, a mutation, weaponizing the forest's raw material. With each step, the creature's limbs scraped the shards, filling the air with discordant harmonics. It was both a warning and a weapon. "We can't outrun it," Mark said, fingers steadying his sidearm as the beast prowled closer. "No," Lyra agreed, feeling her instincts surge past the barricades she'd spent a lifetime building. "But we can use its adaptations against it. The crystals amplify energy, if we overload them." Mark's eyes lit with recognition, like short-circuiting a speaker. He reached into his pack and produced a compact sonic emitter, thumb hovering over the activation plate. "But we'll have to get close." Lyra's protocols screamed against the risk. Approaching an apex predator, in open ground, went against every training directive she had ever absorbed. Yet her body, her instincts, were already aligning with Mark's plan. She met his gaze, golden eyes blazing with something fierce and new. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, alien and human, reason and impulse, no separation. They moved together, low and quick, weaving through the crystal field. The mutated beast tracked them, its resonance building to a fever pitch. Lyra's bioelectric field surged in response, every nerve afire. Mark, crouched beside her, adjusted the emitter's frequency, his free hand brushing hers for balance. The creature reared up, the resonance cavity swelling. Lyra pressed her palm to the largest crystal, focusing her bioelectric surge. Mark, counting down with silent nods, activated the sonic emitter. The air warped with energy. Sound and electricity collided in a blast of color and noise. The shards sang, vibrating until they shattered, fracturing light in every direction. The beast shrieked, disoriented by the sudden overload, its limbs spasming as the ground trembled beneath their feet. The harmonics cascaded, a chain reaction stunning the creature into momentary paralysis. "Time to run," Mark said, already grabbing her hand. They sprinted, dodging falling crystals and stumbling over broken shards. Lyra's markings flared in wild, shifting patterns of exhilaration, her mind flooded with signals she no longer tried to suppress. Calculation and instinct at last were perfectly aligned. As they slipped into the shelter of the next grove, Lyra realized her fingers were still intertwined with Mark's, his palm warm against hers. Their breaths mingled, laughter breaking from their lips, relieved, breathless, alive. For one shining instant, the threat behind them faded into irrelevance, and the world was nothing but the thrum of adrenaline and the promise of the next impossible escape, together. They emerged atop a jagged bluff, boots skidding on loose gravel, just as the crystal field behind them collapsed in a shivering wave of light and noise. Shards tinkled down the slope, their resonance fading into uneasy silence. Lyra and Mark paused, breathless, shoulders pressed together, faces bright with sweat and exhilaration. Before them, the landscape dropped away in a sheer descent, and what lay below stilled even the wild rush of their hearts. In the basin of a vast, unnatural crater, a ship pulsed with living light. Its hull, fractured in places and weeping vapor, radiated shifting colors that danced along the ruined stone. The vessel looked impossibly ancient, its contours both alien and oddly familiar, as though it had been born out of memory and myth. Bands of energy wove over broken plating, sometimes flaring, sometimes dimming, painting the crater's edge in spectral hues. Mark's mouth worked soundlessly, eyes wide. "Is that?" "One of the origin vessels," Lyra breathed, voice trembling with awe. She barely heard herself over the rush of blood in her ears. "Our entire philosophy of controlled evolution comes from fragments of this technology. We've never found one intact." She crouched at the bluff's edge, scanning the crater below. Her sensors danced with data, levels of radiation, biochemical flux, energy fields swirling chaotically. The containment grid that should have sealed the vessel's secrets was breached, pouring invisible protocols into the world above. Lyra's mind reeled with implications. The Accord's centuries of doctrine, their measured, disciplined advances, all of it had sprung from mere shards, pale shadows of what now glimmered before her, alive and dangerous. Mark knelt beside her, gaze darting across the landscape. The forest below had twisted into grotesque new shapes, vines pulsing as if with their own heartbeat. Predators, some recognizable, some grotesquely hybridized, prowled the rim of the crater, their forms flickering as evolution rippled across them in real time. The missing expedition's signal flickered on Lyra's HUD, weak and erratic, buried amid a cacophony of alien signatures. "It's rewriting the ecosystem," Mark said, voice hushed, as if afraid the ship might hear him. "Those creatures, they're being rebuilt," Lyra finished, brow furrowed. "The missing team is somewhere below, but—" She hesitated, parsing the impossible signals. "My scanners are registering life forms that are neither human nor Varen." A chill ran through Mark. "You mean—" "They're alive, but they're changing," Lyra whispered. Her markings pulsed in anxious patterns, echoing the wild uncertainty beating in her chest. The vessel isn't just speeding up evolution, it's blending species. Humans, Varen, anything in range. It's rewriting the rules. For a moment, the enormity of it silenced them both. The ship's hull pulsed again, a slow, thunderous heartbeat that Mark felt in his bones. Down in the crater, a figure staggered into view, human, but with an alien fluidity to her movements, skin flickering with shifting colors. She reached toward the vessel, drawn by a force neither of them could see. Mark squeezed Lyra's hand, grounding her. The gesture, simple and human, sent a wave of calm through her nerves. "Then we'd better stop it before we're next," he said, voice steady despite the fear trembling just beneath the surface. Lyra's mind spun with the Accord's protocols. She should wait for reinforcements, observe and report. Her people would say this was too dangerous, that the risk of contamination was incalculable. Her entire training screamed for caution, for measured action, for control. Her markings flickered in a staccato rhythm, matching the quickening of Mark's pulse as she felt it through his fingers. "My people would say this is too dangerous," Lyra admitted, gaze locked on the chaos below. "We should wait for Accord reinforcements. Containment, not confrontation." Mark squeezed her hand again, firmer this time. "And what do you say?" His voice was a blend of fear and anticipation. Every muscle in his body tensed for the leap. Lyra studied the scene. The ancient ship, the warped forest, the broken containment field bleeding evolution across the landscape, the explorers morphing into something neither species had ever known. Her heart hammered with uncertainty, but also with defiance. She looked at Mark, at the wild hope in his eyes, at the trust implicit in his grip, and felt something shift inside her. "I say sometimes you need a more direct approach," Lyra replied, her voice ringing with resolve. She squeezed his hand back, her markings blazing bold and bright across her cheeks and brow, a signal of her decision that needed no translation. "Ready to improvise?" Mark's answering grin was quick and reckless, matching the wild light in her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." Together they scanned the descent, each noting cover, escape routes, the movement of mutated predators. Their hands lingered, fingers entwined in silent promise. Lyra's sensors flickered with warnings, but she ignored them. Calculation and instinct were, for once, united. With one last breathless glance, they prepared to leave the safety of the bluff and descend toward the heart of the unknown, toward the pulse of the origin vessel and the fate of two worlds entwined. Inside the crater, everything shimmered with instability. The air itself vibrated, thick with energy bleeding from the fractured hull of the origin vessel. Mark's boots crunched over stone and twisted root, while Lyra's every step sent ripples through the metallic dust that blanketed the ground. Here, evolution was no longer a slow force. It was a living tide, surging and receding by the second. They came upon the missing explorers in a half-collapsed hollow near the vessel's pulsing flank. Mark stopped short, breath catching in his throat. The expedition's uniforms were shredded, their bodies stretched between familiar and alien. Faces flickered from human to Veyron and back again, eyes shifting color, skin mapping itself with swirling patterns that crawled beneath the surface. Some had limbs elongated, fingers tipped with bioluminescent claws. Others seemed locked in the agony of transformation, muscle and bone knitting, unknitting, seeking a new equilibrium. Dr. Raylan, once the human team's lead scientist, stood at the center of the group. His voice emerged in harmonics, a layered sound impossible for a human tongue to produce. "Isn't it beautiful?" he intoned, his words sliding between frequencies. "We've surpassed both species' limits. Join us. The vessel can help you evolve beyond instinct and control." Lyra kept her gaze on the hybrids, scanning their vital signs through her visor's overlay. Data scrolled past, spiking cell activity, chaotic neural patterns, immune systems at war with themselves. "They're unstable," she murmured to Mark. "Their cells are breaking down faster than they can repair." "How long do they have?" Mark asked, his hand tightening on her arm. "Not long," Lyra replied, voice low. "The human side resists the change. The Veyron side rejects new instincts. They're burning out from both ends." Another hybrid turned toward them, features blurring in the half-light. "We tried to warn the Accord," they said, voice a strained blend of two dialects. "Forcing evolution like this is dangerous. Your people abandoned instinct. Ours never gained control. The vessel, it showed us what unity could be." Mark shook his head, stepping closer, his eyes sad but unflinching. "But it's killing you," he said, gentle but firm. "You're tearing yourselves apart." Dr. Raylan laughed, a discordant sound, harmonics clashing with human mirth. "A minor setback. The vessel adapts. The next generation will be stable. That's why we summoned rescue teams, more subjects to help us evolve." Lyra's eyes widened as understanding struck. "The distress calls," she whispered. "They weren't just pleas for help. They were bait." Mark's face hardened. Accord teams, human teams, they're all walking into a trap. If they reach the vessel, they'll become just like this, Lyra finished. Her markings blazed with alarm and resolve. "We have to stop them." "But the vessel's influence is spreading," Mark said, glancing at the way the shifting energy fields tugged at the edges of his vision. "If we get closer, we'll start to change too." Lyra's breath came quick, her skin prickling with the field's subtle touch. Already she felt her internal chemistry shifting, her sense of self flickering at the edge of awareness. She fought for control, focusing on Mark's presence beside her. Mark squeezed her hand, steady and sure. "Your people spent centuries studying this tech. If anyone can fight the changes, it's you, just long enough to make a difference. And your instincts might cut through the chaos, see what I can't," Lyra replied, her voice laced with hope and fear. "It's a risk for both of us." Mark's grin flashed, wild and bright despite the danger. "Still think instinct is obsolete?" Lyra's markings danced across her cheeks and brow, broadcasting every emotion: fear, excitement, affection, and something deeper she barely dared name. "Right now, instinct is exactly what we need." They plunged forward, weaving through the maze of hybrids and the vessel's warping field. The hybrids lurched at them, movements unpredictable, sometimes pleading, sometimes hostile. Lyra's discipline kicked in, her body moving with a grace that was both calculated and raw. She dodged a lashing arm, pulsed a shock of bioelectricity to disrupt a charging hybrid's motor control, then spun to shield Mark's flank. Mark fought with his own style, a blend of reflex and improvisation. He ducked a swipe, rolled beneath a mutated Varen's leap, and used his sidearm's sonic pulse to scatter a knot of hybrids blocking their path. "Left!" he shouted, pointing as a clear lane opened toward the vessel's core. They moved as one, pushing through the strobing field. The air thickened, every breath charged with alien potential. Lyra felt her senses spike. Colors too vivid, sounds layered and strange. Her skin began to shimmer, markings flowing with new energy, the patterns almost alive. Mark stumbled as his veins glowed faintly gold beneath the skin, adrenaline surging in a wave that threatened to drown thought itself. "Lyra," he gasped, but she was already at his side, supporting him. "I can feel it. It's trying to rewrite me." "Hold on," she said, voice fierce, her own body betraying her with every step. "Don't let go of yourself. Focus on what you are, not what the vessel wants." They pressed forward, Mark's grip on her hand anchoring them both against the evolutionary storm. In the heart of the crater, the vessel's hull split open like a wound, revealing a core of swirling light and alien machinery. Energy coiled around them, probing, testing, offering promises of transcendence. Lyra's mind flickered with visions, flashes of what she might become if she surrendered. Strength without limit, senses beyond comprehension, control so absolute it eclipsed emotion. But in each vision, she saw herself alone, severed from the messy, beautiful chaos of connection. Mark's presence cut through the temptations. She clung to him, her discipline a shield, his instincts a compass. Mark, too, was beset by possibilities. A body that would never tire, reflexes sharper than thought, emotions stripped to pure purpose. Yet every vision was cold, empty, missing the spark that made him human. He gritted his teeth, drawing strength from the warmth of Lyra's hand, from the wild hope in her eyes. They fought through the shifting tide, Lyra's discipline and Mark's intuition blending in a dance of survival. The world warped around them, but together they reached the core, bodies changing with every step, her skin glowing, his veins lit with golden fire, fighting to hold on to themselves and to each other against the vessel's impossible pull. The vessel's heart pulsed with alien energy, a living, breathing core at the center of an unraveling world. Lyra and Mark stood before it, every cell in their bodies vibrating to a rhythm older than either of their species. The protocols that spilled from the heart reached out, invisible but irresistible, threads of code and intent winding through flesh and thought. Lyra felt them burrowing into her DNA, her mind awash with visions of infinite possibility, her voice suddenly resonant with harmonics she'd never produced before. "The containment isn't failing, it's been inverted," she said, each word ringing with a strange, layered echo. "Instead of holding evolution in, it's forcing it out into everything it touches." Mark staggered beside her, knuckles white around her hand, jaw clenched as he fought the pressure building behind his eyes. Every heartbeat, the vessel's grip tightened, coaxing, rewriting, remaking. He forced himself to focus on Lyra's face, on the patterns dancing in her skin. "So we flip it back," he said, his voice raw with effort, fighting to keep his own instincts from splintering under the assault. Lyra tried to laugh, the sound broken and wild, her markings flickering in chaotic, brilliant patterns. "The controls are quantum locked. It would take days, even for me, to solve the access layers. We don't have that kind of time." Mark looked at her, sweat tracing gold-lit veins across his brow. The vessel pressed in on all sides, flooding him with urges: fight, flee, surrender. But he had learned something from Lyra, something about bending instead of breaking. "Good thing we're not playing by the rules," he said, and pulled her close. For an instant, time bent around them, the field of evolution pausing as Mark pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was fierce and desperate, not just a plea for connection, but a spark of defiance. instinct and control fusing in a heartbeat. Lyra's body responded in ways she'd never allowed, signals cascading through her like wildfire: fear, excitement, longing, trust. The vessel hesitated, its protocols faltering, as if it could not comprehend this act of chosen union. A revelation struck, slicing through the haze. Lyra broke away, eyes wide with the clarity of sudden insight. The vessel responds to biological cues, she breathed. Instinct and control, that's what it's searching for. If we give it both, on our terms, not as rivals but as partners, we might force it to break its own logic. Around them, the hybrids began to close in, faces twisted by the vessel's hunger for synthesis. Above, rescue ships broke through the clouds, engines roaring, their hulls painted with accord glyphs and human sigils. Time was running out. Mark met her gaze, steady in the storm. "Then let's show it what we are," he said. At the critical instant, Lyra surrendered to instinct. She let her markings blaze with every pattern she had ever hidden or suppressed: fear, hope, hunger, love. The discipline of a lifetime dropped away, and in its place came something deeper, wilder, more true. Mark, beside her, did the opposite. He fought down the surge of adrenaline that threatened to sweep him away, clamped down on the chaos, forced every muscle into stillness. His mind became a pillar of will, unyielding. The vessel's field surged around them, probing, testing, desperate to collapse them into one new form. But their opposition, her wild surrender, his stubborn restraint, was not chaos, but choice. The protocols, designed to force synthesis, faltered. The quantum lock on the controls flickered, then shattered with a rippling wave of energy. "Now!" Lyra shouted, her voice splitting into harmonics and tones both human and Varen. Together they lunged forward, Mark improvising, Lyra precise, hands flying over the ancient controls. Their movements echoed each other, her fingers tracing the vessel's interface in a dance of calculated intent, his hands slapping at unfamiliar glyphs, trusting in instinct and connection. The fail-safe sequence blazed to life, energy flooding back into the vessel's core. The release was not just mechanical, but biological. A pulse shot outward, rippling through the evolutionary field, tearing the protocols from every cell, reversing forced changes. The hybrids gasped and collapsed, their bodies shuddering as the alien code unraveled. Across the crater, plants, animals, and the very air shimmered, returning to a state closer to what nature intended. But in Lyra and Mark, something new remained. Their bodies, for a moment, glowed with the imprint of what they had chosen, her skin shimmering with a memory of wild color, his veins faintly golden, pulses of light flickering beneath. They felt each other's presence, not just as a touch, but as a current, a bond that was neither pure instinct nor total control, but a synthesis they had created together. Above them, the rescue ships landed in clouds of dust and swirling light. Accord officials in gleaming armor and human scientists in battered field suits poured into the crater, demanding answers. Questions flew. What had happened to the expedition? Why had the signals changed? Was the vessel's technology now safe or more dangerous than ever? Lyra met their barrage with calm, letting her markings show pride and affection, the patterns bold and unapologetic. Mark stood beside her, his smile as open and fearless as ever. "Sometimes the best evolution," Lyra said, letting her voice ring with both harmony and humanity, "is remembering what you almost lost." The origin vessel, its work undone, faded into the earth. It left only mysteries, blueprints of possibility, echoes of what might have been. The debates began at once, Accord and human scientists arguing over data, risk, and meaning. Lyra and Mark exchanged a glance, words unnecessary. They slipped away from the clamor, hand in hand, leaving old certainties behind. Beyond the crater, the world was waiting, changed perhaps, but still full of unknowns. As they walked, Mark squeezed her fingers, and Lyra's markings pulsed with quiet joy. They were two pioneers, ready to challenge old dogmas and explore new frontiers. Together, they chose a future where instinct and control, passion and calculation, worked not as rivals, but as partners. And as they ventured into the unknown, Lyra understood what true evolution was. Not what was forced upon you, but what you chose for yourself, hand in hand with someone brave enough to leap into the impossible with you.